So let me introduce a little bit myself because I mean, speaking about the maturity or senility of CSS, you have to wonder who I am to be so arrogant about CSS. I'm probably the oldest person in this room. I started working with web standards in the early days of the web standards. I think I contributed to HTML to mime, stuff like that back in 91, 2, 3. So I think I met Tim Berners-Lee back in 91 or 92, first days of the web. And I was appointed co-chairman of the CSS Working Group back in 2008 because I was the only survivor of the early CSS Working Group who did not become mad. Okay. So, is there someone remaining in the room? Yes, that's Daniel. Okay, Daniel, co-chairman. And it's about that. I mean, we were 8 in the room at that time. The CSS Working Group was dying, and I was the only one available, and then they got me. So I'm going to explain you a little bit what is CSS behind the curtains. Because you are, I guess, all users of CSS, you all know CSS, some of you master CSS, but I guess that not a lot of you know how we standardize CSS on a daily basis. It is a completely different task, it's a completely different perspective, and it's very different from using CSS. Okay? Just for the record, who does not know CSS in the room? Good. So, I don't know if you know these two guys. Bert Bos and Håkon Lie are the two inventors between codes of CSS. The girl behind them, who is doing all the work, and it's not only an image, unfortunately, she's Elika Etemad, also known as Fantasy, and she's an incredible contributor to CSS Working Group. Bert and Håkon were two academic guys in the beginning of the web. Håkon was the first employee of the Web Development Consortium hired by Tim Berners-Lee directly. And Bert was an academic working at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And they both had a proposal for style sheets on the web. A little bit inconsistent. I mean, they had two different proposals, different architectures, but both of them were compatible, let's say, and they gathered to make the CSS proposal. So, as you know, CSS is fault tolerant, right? We have what we call the error handling strategies in CSS that make the whole thing workable. But what is really, really important in CSS is the C for the Cascade. Okay? Without the Cascade, CSS wouldn't be so ubiquitous today. As a matter of fact, you probably know there was another style language on the web, let's say 10 years ago. That was XSLFO. XSLFO, it was extensible style language formatting objects. And how many of you know XSLT? Okay. How many of you think XSLT is well designed and understandable? Good. XSLFO was even worse. So it was the logics of XSLT with formatting properties, some of them resembling CSS, some of them very different from CSS. And it was perfect for batch processing because it was super powerful. But for the web, it was incredibly complex, far too complicated to offer. At Netscape, I worked a little bit on XSLT and XSLFO, and I had a lot of problems. I had to call an expert of XSLT every other minute to check what I was doing on XSLT and XSLFO, because it's far too complex. So that could not work out. One of the critical features of HTML and CSS beyond the fault tolerant thing is that it's not paddable. It is easy enough that you can look at the source and understand what you read and copy it, and you know what it's going to do. So that is one of the critical architectural designs of HTML and CSS. Okay? To answer your question, by the way, about is HTML fault tolerant by design or by mistake or whatever, it's by design, but not of HTML itself, of the browsers. Because the browsers did not want to fail when the authors were making a mistake in HTML.
Pascal as well.
Exactly. So Ocon and Bert offered their proposal about CSS back in '95, and it quickly became a working group inside the newly formed World Web Consortium. Okay. Actually, the CSS Working Group is nowadays the oldest still active working group of the World Web Consortium, because the HTML working group at some point in the past stopped after HTML 4.0.1. And the consortium had that great idea of starting XHTML2 that was not backwards compatible with HTML4. And the whole thing triggered the Web Working Group and the mess with the forks of HTML. It was a huge success and a very good idea. So we started shouting a little bit. I mean, myself, people like Jeffrey Salman that you quoted. And eventually Tim Berners-Lee heard us and said, yeah, well, we probably made a little mistake. And we're going to dump HTML2 and restart something based on HTML4 that gave HTML5, okay? So CSS is the oldest one. It's also nowadays the most active working group in the consortium. It's considered as probably the most successful too. We're a large group, we are friends. Most of us have been working together for years and years and years. I mean, we hang out at the bar after the standardization session and we discuss about everything. But inside the working group, it's a bloody battle. There's blood on the walls, seriously. We have arguments all the time. We disagree in strategy. Google, you can understand easily that Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Mozilla have very, very different strategies. And every member of the working group has its own technical schedule. Some of them want to invest on responsive design, media queries, for instance, while another one wants to invest on fonts because they want to reach the Asian market. For instance, vertical writing for China and Japan. That's what Microsoft did 10, 12 years ago. They invested only on text and fonts, while the others wanted flexbox, for instance. So we fight all the time. The last argument was a week ago, ended up in an ultimatum. Behind the curtains, you will never know. I will not tell you who it was. I will not tell you how it was solved, but you have to know that every week we have a problem. And it's the chair's responsibility to solve the problems behind the curtains and find a compromise that some people call weak and some of us call cool, because otherwise nothing would work. So the CSS Working Group was on the verge of extinction back in 2008. We were only 32 members, but 8 to 10 active people. And we had only 30 specs on the radar, but most of them were inactive because when you have 8 people in the group, how can you manage 30 specifications? This is just impossible. And when the consortium called me and Peter Lintz, my other co-chair, to start sharing the group, they told us you have 6 months to make the working group survive. So making it survive meant at that time increase the number of members, increase the number of specifications going to at least candidates' recommendation, make it move. And I think we succeeded, because in 2013, we now roughly have 100 members. We multiplied the number of active members by 4, which is not bad. And we had 65 specs on the radar back in 2013, and I think we now have 73. So it's the most active working group in the consortium. We publish drafts, and candidate recommendations and proposal recommendations all the time. You can check that on w3.org/tr. You will find all documents, even drafts. But one of the main problems of CSS is that, yeah, it's 20 years old. How many languages do you use that are 20 years old? Not a lot. Okay, even if HTML is the direct descendant of the older HTML, it has evolved a lot. Really. I mean, in the beginning, a P element was not a paragraph. In Tim Berners-Lee's mind, a P element was the gap between two paragraphs. It was purely presentation. So it evolved a lot. CSS has grown in circles. CSS1, 12 pages printed. CSS2, 120 pages, with small script. Normal script, 200. CSS3, I don't even count, it's probably 1,000. Okay, and I'm not even discussing CSS4. Architecturally, it means that all the things that we designed, that we carefully ironed and chose 20 years ago, are engraved in the marble forever. We have millions and millions, literally millions of websites using them. These are things we cannot touch anymore. Okay? When you have a technology like that, and you want to make that technology evolve, it goes into circles. And you hit collisions between the various features of your technology all the time. Let me give you a very concrete example. What happens if you do vertical writing in a float inside a flexbox in a table? And you resize the table. Nobody knows at this time. Seriously, nobody knows. Collisions increase. It's a factorial n problem. Okay? We have n properties, factorial n collisions. How long are we going to live with it? How long are you going to be willing to use it? And this is another problem, because it's getting more complex every day, and I will show you features that are not understandable in the future of CSS. And will you adopt them? I'm not so sure. So this is how we work for a document. A document usually comes from an idea or submission by an individual or a member of the group. When I say a member, it's a corporation. Let's say Microsoft, Adobe, someone. It's discussed in the mailing list. Yeah, it's discussed in the mailing list. And upon working group's approval, it becomes an unofficial editor's draft. An editor's draft means no endorsement by the Web Consortium, but you have the right, with a special tag saying it's not official, to put it on the w3.org just for business of management, that's all. And then you have the first important step, first public working draft. This is very important because there's a patent review done by the legal departments of the member to check that no one is going to infringe on an existing patent. For instance, you're not patenting the movement of the mouse. For the people remembering that someone patented that long ago and got millions and millions of dollars from Microsoft and Apple, even if there was prior art. And as soon as the lawyers have given their agreement, it's published as an official working draft of the consortium, meaning it's an official activity of all the members. And then we are doing a lot of working drafts. We are running the things in circles. I mean, it's a virtuous circle, but we can have sometimes 20, 30, 40 working drafts for a single document. Then it becomes a candidate recommendation. Candidate recommendation means that it's ready for implementation, test implementation. So in the process of the consortium, the process of a spec, it's similar to the IETF, for those who know IETF. We require 2 interoperable implementations per feature. Okay? So it does not mean that we need 2 browsers implementing everything. For property 1, we can have Spartan, for instance, or Opera and Mozilla implementing it correctly. And for property 2, we can have Mozilla and Google. But as soon as we have 2 grains per feature, we're good to go to propose recommendation. This is the last step. It's almost, how can I say, it's almost the stamp step. It's where the members of the consortium vote and give a review of the document. So we have roughly 400 members in the consortium and usually less than 25 votes. The other ones, I don't know what they're doing in the consortium. I mean, at least the representatives, the people who vote, have no clue. And as soon as the members' review is positive, Tim Berners-Lee approves the document and it becomes stamp. So this is a quite long and complex process. And if you think this takes months from submission to rec, you're entirely wrong. It never takes less than a year. And we have documents that took 15 years, and they're not a rec yet. I'm going to show you one. But before that, yeah, given your reaction, I guess you understand. So this is a drawing made by Simon Sapin, a member of the working group. He works for Mozilla on the server engine. This is the box model. It is incredibly complex. It was the first time someone drew it. So it's only here to give you an idea of the complexity of CSS. Let's take variables. So variables, it's 16 years for a Haskell working draft, and it's not here yet. And instead of doing what all the preprocessors do, we found something much better, much more complicated, that nobody understands, with a crazy name: custom inherited user-defined properties. So, in fact, it means something. Oh yeah, by the way, user-defined inherited properties, UDIP, another crazy acronym. Basically, you define your own property somewhere, and you inherit it down the tree, okay? And you can reuse it. So it's much more powerful than a hash define in a preprocessor, but it's also less understandable, okay? And this might be the next question. Why not hash define? Seriously, you want us to do things simple while we could make them complicated? We choose to make complicated. Do you really think we are users of our own technologies? No, we're not. Some of us in the CSS Working Group can barely design a web page. Okay? We perfectly know the specs. We know each line of the spec. If you quote something in the spec, we can tell you which page, which paragraph, and how it relates to other things. But we don't design web pages. You are the users. We love fighting. We keep fighting for years and years and years, and because we're ashamed of that, we say, this is the W3C process. And it's so easy and so common. And don't you like the dash notation? How many mistakes are you going to do with that? I mean, one dash is already painful. Two, I'm sure the fault tolerance, you are going to use it. Yeah, we suck. Basically, we suck. And then you wanted to vertically center something. You were expecting to use something like vertical align center. Oh, come on, guys. That's far too simple. So after 20 years, we decided that no, we don't want to do that. And we said, oh, we are much better. We are going to use Flexbox. Not understandable. I mean, just go on the internet, look for vertically center a box with Flexbox, and read it. Good luck. Really, good luck. Excuse me? Use a table. That's far simpler. So the flexible box model, this is something really, really old. I mean, for the people in the room who did software development on Unix, X window, using the Athena widget set on Motif, it was already flexing 25 years ago. Okay, so it comes a long way from the past. It's a way of distributing space around and inside elements in a layout. Okay, but when you are doing user interface in C++, you create the spaces that you insert. Okay, for instance, in Zool or XAML, if you know these technologies, when you want two labels on a line to flex, you have a spacer, a label, another spacer, a label, and a spacer. Or you align the stuff with at least one space in between. In HTML, you don't have elements for space. So we come up with very complex stuff to simulate the presence of space, and it's absolutely not understandable. The people who promote this technology in the CSS Working Group, they like it, because it's super powerful. Honestly, I think that you are going to use Stack Overflow a lot. I mean, the simple things will be simple. The less simple things will be incredibly complicated. But if you can use it, yes, it will be incredible, because all the things that you have always wanted to do, like making sure that an element remains all the time at the bottom of the document, or bottom of the viewport, for instance, or making an element grow when you resize the viewport. This is going to work automatically, as you said, natively responsive, just like the text flow in the original types of the web. I'm not sure it's going to be accessible, by the way, or not easily. But as you can see, the values of flex properties are completely inconsistent. Flex, there's a flex prefix, then no prefix, then space prefix. So when you try telling this kind of comment inside the CSS Working Group, I mean, I try to bring a voice of sanity, and the other says, no, this is perfect. And because we work based on consensus, when you're alone, it doesn't work. You have to be at least 50% to do something. But I'm confident that eventually, in the long run, we will have some consistency here. On the bright side of life, magazine layout. So, Jeremy said that we came from print, and Photoshop, for instance, has this notion of width and height of a document. But as you were always asking for the vertical centering of a box, you've always asked another question. How do I make my text flow around an image? Okay, I know how to float on the left, float on the right. What about the center? Short answer, no you can't. And it's been like that for 20 years. Okay, now we can do it. These are proposals coming from Adobe about regions, exclusions, shapes, and they are really shaking the web, because they are bringing technologies that all the people doing print know really, really well. And the people working in marketing, they have been requesting for this 20 years. And we can finally do it. And it's not only for websites, it's also for another technology that is incredibly spreading, and it's based on the web. It's electronic books. EPUB is based on HTML, CSS, regions, exclusions, stuff like that. Without that, you cannot have a layout like the National Geographic, for instance, in an ebook. This is taken from the National Geographic. They do that all the time. If you don't have it, you have to resort to a JavaScript hack computing the lines. It's extremely slow, unreliable, and it's definitely ugly. We will have filter effects. All the modern devices, computers, or smartphones have an extremely powerful GPU, and we're going to use the GPU. So blurring, coloring, filtering, changing the color map, bending, applying shaders, all of that is already doable on the web. Okay, the legacy browsers, the older browsers are not going to do it, but Google, Chrome, Safari, Mozilla, Spartan, they're all using shaders and filters through SVG or CSS on HTML, and this is going to completely change the web, because the way we are going to render the data, either in 2D or 3D, is going to massively hit the users. And let's dive into selectors. Yes, I'm on time. Because this is one of the first features you see when you touch CSS for the first time, the way you select an element and apply a property. So we are now discussing CSS 4. CSS 3 was published quite long ago now. And we have weird stuff in Selectors 4. Column matches. So column matches was introduced because some members of the working group don't want to introduce a subject selector. So what would be a subject selector? When you have P greater than A, in CSS it selects all the anchors inside a paragraph, right? But in some cases you want to select all the paragraphs containing an anchor. That's entirely different. That's a subject selector on the P, right? And the browser vendors don't want to do that, because all the algorithms go from the greatest depth to the top. They climb up the document tree. They don't want to do the contrary. So that argument against implementing this was perfectly valid 15 or 16 years ago on a Pentium 1 or 2 or a 486 with only 1 gig of RAM. But nowadays, this smartphone is 1,000,000 times more powerful. It has, I don't know, 10-fold more memory. So the argument is not valid anymore. But they stick to the same argument because they don't want to change their algorithm. It would imply too much work. You know, engineers, poor engineers and coders, they don't want to work. It's about that. So we came up with something completely incredible called column matches, doing exactly the same, but more complicated. It's more powerful, and I bet you will never use the complex cases because it's too complicated. But for the simple things, it's ugly. Even the examples in the specifications cannot tell why this is useful. And I think it's a bit of something. We are going to extend column not to, for the time being here, in column not you can only have a simple selector. For instance, a class selector, a type element selector, an ID selector. No, we want more. We want the full power of all selectors, and even group of selectors. Okay, what the hell is the specificity of this? Can someone tell me? What is the specificity of the negation of a group of selectors? No one knows. It's undefined for the time being. We don't know. It will probably be the lowest specificity of the selector in the group. Compute it. Go ahead. Goodbye. It's going to be ugly. We have another thing, column has, which is, let's say, the little brother of column matches. You already don't need column matches, so column has is going to be a hit. And it takes not a selector, it takes a partial selector. So imagine a selector comprised of a first part and a second part with a combinator in between. Get rid of the first part. How are we going to represent this in the document object model? You're not even able to put a selector as a value of a pseudo class in the object model right now. Nobody knows. It's completely crazy. We are going to extend the nth pseudo classes to very complicated stuff, like this is the usual part of the end child, but of something. Okay? And this can be any selector. So, as an example, tr, end child of 2n plus 1, and star and shadow thread construct of TR select exactly the same elements. Okay? They have also exactly the same specificity, because in Selectors 4, you compute the specificity looking at all the selectors. So this is 0, this is the pseudo class, and this is a type element. Okay, seriously, do you envision a world tomorrow with both solutions where the tutorials and the books have a choice? I mean, which one will be recommended? This is crazy. We need only one solution, not two. We don't need that. And some uber geeks in the CSS Working Group just cannot see the world from a user's perspective. And all users are you guys, meaning web authors. If it gets too complicated, you will not use it. So it's a waste of time for us. And you have completely crazy stuff like the will change property. The will change property is an optimization. And it's a property telling the rendering engine at the very low level, we are going to change the layout. Come on, yeah, the layout engine is made to change the layout. But if you apply that property poorly, for instance, star will change, yes. It's not going to optimize your website. It's going to drastically decrease the performance, in fact. So good luck with that again. It's not going to be usable. How many people have looked at the shadow DOM? How many have understood everything? Yes. How many like the CSS part of the shadow DOM? Exactly. This was entirely suggested by Google, because Google needs a solution right now for Gmail and their other websites. They need componentization of everything now. And when a solution is proposed by a single vendor and we don't have the time to discuss it, it's ugly. And it's ugly. We have stuff like /deep/. This is a combination. Not error prone at all. We have :host of something. It's different, it's not the same thing. :host-context of something. So expect this to be entirely rewritten if we can fight against Google. As I said, a fast process with too few people leads to bad solutions. Standardization, standards, they do take time, a lot of time. Without time, we compromise it. But we are going to achieve world domination, fortunately. But of course, we are going to discuss it. It's a word of polyfills, as you all know, and this is wrong. A polyfill is a hack. Okay? When you write a CSS polyfill, you have to parse the CSS style sheet and do ugly stuff. For instance, inserting fake elements into the render tree to generate stuff. It's completely hacky. We need to do much, much better than that based on interoperable solutions plugged into the CSS parser and the layout engine. So this is what we are going to do. We should be able to instantiate the CSS parser. Okay, I want to parse this string and get an object model in return. This we can't do nowadays. You can parse HTML, you can even parse JavaScript to reflect. You cannot parse CSS, unless you put the CSS as inline style on an element. You should be able to parse style sheets, parts of style sheet, properties, values, selectors, whatever. Whatever is a component in CSS should be parsable. We need a much better object model. The current CSS object model completely sucks, and we all know it. It's unreliable, it's only partly implemented, we have to revamp it entirely. We need to extend it, because a lot of stuff in CSS is just not implemented as of today. And this parser should be extensible, because if you want to get rid of polyfills, you should be able to define your own properties, your own values, and plug all of that into the render tree. You will also want to extend media queries. After all, a media query is a condition with a false or true Boolean answer. Okay? So why not have a JavaScript extension replying a Boolean, and you have your own media query replying to an event from, I don't know, the accelerator, the gyroscope, whatever. You can do that. So we should be able to have extensible media queries. We are going to do it. Of course, with an object model for that. The box tree. If you want to do polyfills, real polyfills, you need to create anonymous boxes and not elements, boxes, into the render, the physical tree of the layout engine to plug them in and address them directly to set the content, set the properties and everything as if they were created by the rendering engine itself. Without that, we can't have very powerful and functional polyfills. So we are currently discussing this in the CSS Working Group. It's called the Houdini project, like the great magician Houdini, who could leave a box easily. You can follow what we do there. It's a public mailing list, and I encourage you to look at that. How many of you have already sent something or read the contents of or mailing list Weber style? Yeah, well, you can do better than that. It's entirely public. You heard me saying that we are not web designers, and still we have millions and millions of web offers as users. So without your input, we make bad decisions. The only way you can have an influence on us is through this mailing list. It's a free subscription. You can send emails. If your emails are relevant and polite, you will always get an answer. Of course, if you start trolling us, you will also get an answer. A different troll. But seriously, we rely on your input and we'll welcome your input. So please join. Thank you very much.
Имаме около 10 минути за въпроси. Кой ще бъде пръв?
Hello, thank you for your talk. Let's see here something. I want to ask, have you heard about element queries? I think it was something that Glazman group wrote.
Element queries?
Yeah. Have you heard about it?
Ah, that old dinosaur.
Yeah. Are you talking about this in the CSW?
Okay, yeah. So, we have a big problem with element queries. Because it's modifying the properties inside the layout engine based on something already in the layout. Okay? So we can have circular references. And we don't like circular references. Some of the circular references in queries like that are pretty complex to detect, in fact. So it's still a matter of discussion. Some browser vendors have resisted quite severely against that. I know it sounds a cool feature from a user's perspective. It doesn't say it's easy to program. Not everything that we always have a problem between us guys in the working group and you guys, designers or users. We don't understand the world of web design. You are rarely coders of C++ in a web engine, okay? Some features can be trivially described in a one-liner, and you think it's trivial to do. And for us, it means re-architecturing everything. Or implementing tons of code just to detect a circular reference. And browser vendors don't want to do that because that can lead to huge memory footprint, crashes, stuff like that. So honestly, I'm not sure we're going to have element queries. If we have it, good. Don't bet on it.
Други въпроси?
About
Backface visibility.
backface visibility?
Yeah.
You mean the 3D stuff to see the back of the elements?
Backface visibility, the good practice for optimization, CSS animations, and for
The hack!
yeah. Well,
That's a hack. So what do I think of hacks? It's just like yet another hack. So hacks are not maintainable, they're not understandable, and you can be sure at some point in the future, browsers are going to change the behavior and your hack will not work anymore. So don't use the hacks.
So you talked about how long it takes something to go to candidate recommendation and proposal. 15 years.
Sometimes, only
Sometimes
sometimes.
15 years or less. But isn't the truth that what matters to us is not whether it's a draft, a candidate recommendation, a proposal, it's whether it's in the browsers. So what's the point? What's the relevance of the W3C stamp of approval if something's been working in browsers for
You call me a troll.
XML HTTP request, inner HTML, the web is full of things that were...
If you want to discuss the interoperability of XML HTTP requests, we can do that. It's totally not interoperable.
I know it's working.
Yeah. So what's the point? Until proposed recommendation, a spec can always change entirely. Entirely. Okay. It's considered as good for prototyping and testing, but not stable enough for release to the general public. So, as you know, and everyone knows here, we used to have vendor prefixes. Dash most, dash something, dash webkit, dash something. It was better than nothing, but it's a suboptimal solution. And nowadays, the browser vendors have a strong preference for preferences in the Chrome flags or Mozilla preferences or stuff like that to enable or disable something. Anyway, with prefixes of that solution, it means that you have to do something special to use this feature in a production website. If you use dash moz dash property, you can be sure that at some point in the future the dash moz is going to fall. So websites written that way and badly maintained are going to fall too. And stuff behind preferences in Chrome or now in Mozilla, you cannot use them because users don't enable that by default. So, yes, I agree that from a web offer's perspective, what really matters is the implementation and shipping of that implementation. But it's not because it's implemented that it's available to the general user and general public. You have to wait until it stabilizes.
But not before. The stuff that took 15 years to standardize that was in all browsers after a few years. Stuff in CSS 2.1.
And yes, because CSS 2.1 is a very special case. Because it's a revamp of CSS 2.0 that was written before the rules of 2 interoperable features per implementations per feature. So we had to do that to match the process. But for the new specs, we have implementations that are completely unstable. Look at gradients. Gradients were implemented originally by WebKit, as you said, by Safari, with a very old version that they still have to maintain because even Apple websites are full of old gradients, but all the other browser vendors have moved 3 times the syntax and the grammar. How can you rely on that? You don't want to rely on that. And I mean, if you take a normal web editor today, it has to output 6 to 8 gradient lines to match everything. And some of the gradients are not translatable into older Safari versions. It's impossible. There's no matching. It's not because it's available that it's usable in production.
But there is stuff that's usable in production that isn't yet standardized.
Polyfills.
What is that? 2 questions. The first one, what is the current position of the CSS Working Group?
The current one?
position of the CSS Working Group towards the CSS preprocessors? Do you like them? Do you consider them good or bad?
Okay.
And the second question is, why do you keep referencing Internet Explorer as Spartan? Is there a policy about that, or just the way you want to do it?
Okay, first question first. We love preprocessors. They do the job we don't. No, I'm kidding. No, seriously, preprocessors, we have no opinion. Preprocessors are part of the ecosystem. It's like, your question is, for me, is similar to, what do you think of the Eclipse IDE? I have no opinion. I don't care. If your question is, do you think that CSS should implement more of the stuff the CSS processors are implementing? Just use the $sign, $foo, for instance, for a variable. And everyone told us, you know guys, everywhere in all languages $foo is a variable. You should use $foo. It's super simple. No, we can't. Because if we use $foo, there's a collision between the preprocessor's variables and the CSS variables. See what I mean? And that is not an option. So we have to find something else. So we all understand the requests from the CSS process guys, and we are very sorry because we cannot say yes. It's impossible for us. We are going to leave the pre-processing stuff to the preprocessors. They do a great job. It's not our task. CSS is not about a programming language. It's about layout. If you want stuff for maintainability, the preprocessors do it just fine. We are going to have things like mix-ins, hierarchical rules. It will ease the pain, not 100%. We cannot. Second question was about Internet Explorer and Spartan, and the last one I hear. What's the question exactly?
The question was, why do you keep referring to Internet Explorer?
Because Spartan is not available entirely yet. And Internet Explorer is still shipping, available, and for us, it's still a test platform. Okay.
You always mention Spartan, not Internet Explorer. That's my question. Why do you do that?
Oh, okay. You know the famous say by Carthago de Landrest? No? Okay, Carthago must be destroyed. Internet Explorer must be destroyed.
Last question.
One question is on that abstract is very, I think, sensitive. How will you finally make float center?
So, how much do you pay? I heard that bribing is important in Bulgaria, so how much do you pay? There's a proposal for float center. No, yeah, right. So we have two solutions. First, there's a real proposal for float center somewhere, but I'm not sure it's going to be implemented. We have another one. It's called regions and exclusions, and you can define a shape somewhere, and your text flows around something. So you position an element with an exclusion inside your content, in the center of your content, and then your text flows around. That works. That's your solution.
Okay, so as always, the most complex one.
What do you want me to reply? Of course. Seriously, we could make simple? No. No, in this case, it is more complex than it looks. Float center is not enough because you really want to center things exactly. Okay. For instance, you want to center inside a column, but only 30%. So you want always to position stuff. Okay. When you have an image with an alpha gradient, alpha channel, you want to use that alpha channel, but it's sometimes not enough, and you want to have a padding around the alpha channel, you have to define these kind of things. So that's why we have regions in this.
Okay, that's nice, but that's the most popular question on Stack Overflow. How to make it center? And there are at least 175 ways to do that. So
Okay, let me use humor. You have waited 20 years. Can't you wait 6 months more?
yeah.